Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our virtual cultural exchange between Morocco and Gibraltar. This event is organized jointly by the Gibraltar-Morocco Business Association, of which Mr. Clive Reid is the president, and the Strait of Gibraltar Association, of which Mr. Brahim Prikas is president. I am Henry Sacramento, your host this evening. And I'd like to remind our viewers this evening that they will be able to ask questions of our guests this evening. Also remind us that we do have a YouTube channel. I encourage you to visit our YouTube previous presentations, like, subscribe, and follow us on our Facebook page, Strait of Gibraltar as well. Let me introduce our guest this evening. He was born in Jerusalem, in Israel, on the 3rd of July, 1982. He is of French nationality. Most of his childhood and teenage years were spent in Paris, although he lived in Gibraltar between 1984 and 1987, and in Israel until 1988. He started his law degree in Paris and then relocated to the UK, where he completed his law degree and his legal practice course, qualifying as a solicitor under the laws of England and Wales. He spent 3 of his earliest years in Gibraltar between the ages of 2 and 5. This left a big impression on him and a strong yearning to return. He returned with his parents a few times, as well as spending part of his summer from the age of 15 until the age of 19 in Gibraltar on his own, where he was kindly hosted by local families, who not only invited him, but also made him feel at home. He was very impressed with the generosity he experienced here during those years. His life changed dramatically in the summer of 2001, when he started a relationship in Gibraltar with Yael Macias, the person that was going to become his wife 5 years later, and with whom they are very blessed to have founded a family with 5 beautiful children. They moved to Gibraltar in July 2008, where they both started training contracts at Hassan's international law firm. He remained at Hassan's until June 2016 and has been self-employed since, with a professional focus on commodities and property development in Morocco. He looks forward to returning as soon as maritime links are re-established between Spain and Morocco. He also forms part of the Gibraltar Business Association. Good evening and welcome, Joshua Lhote. Seem to be having technical difficulties this evening. Joshua, are you with us? Welcome. Finally.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you.
Welcome, Joshua. What a pleasure to have you with us and finally managed to connect. Esto pasa en el directo sometimes. Joshua, my first question to you, what prompted you to join the Gibraltar-Morocco Business Association, of which Mr. Clive Reid is the president?
So I first went to Morocco about 10 years ago. I already lived in Gibraltar. I've been here since 2008. And the first time I went to Morocco, I was obviously very surprised with, so many things that were happening in the country and what I saw, a very quickly developing country. And I was also as surprised to see that despite of the closeness, physical closeness between Gibraltar and Morocco, there was no connections between the two countries. And I just thought, something had to be done. And I looked into it, and I eventually did find the Gibraltar-Morocco Business Association, as well as a number of individuals in Gibraltar were looking at Morocco and its potential, and I just thought that it would be very interesting for me, as well as for the association, to try and engage as much as possible with Morocco, and that's the reason why I started. And the aim is still there to connect Gibraltar and Morocco as well, and as and in so many potential routes as possible.
Joshua, what is your role within the association?
So I'm an executive member, and being a lawyer, I also a legal advisor for the association. I just, for example, revisited the constitution a number of years ago and was involved in the drafting of the memorandum of understanding between the Gibraltar government and the Gibraltar Morocco Minister Association. Um, and in general, I what I try to do is some administration and take forward all the different challenges that we've set ourselves, in close relation to all the other members.
Joshua, your early beginnings, what was it like growing up in Jerusalem and, of course, Gibraltar, and then you went on to Paris? How did that happen?
Well, at a young age, you really follow your parents. I didn't really have a say, although the outcome was amazing in the sense that from between the age of my birth until the age of 6, I'd lived in 3 different countries with 3 different languages. So I was trilingual in that sense, just by having followed my parents, which is in
So
itself.
what is your first language, Joshua?
Well, I would say like the language at home that my parents spoke was always French, because they're both from Paris. The first language I really, the formal language I remember is English, because I was in Gibraltar at the age of 2 to 5. And then the following year, when I was in Israel, I had to learn Hebrew, because my classmates didn't know any other language. And then going to France, French was already quite a natural language for me because it was a home language, became also a formal language, and the language which I used until I finished part of my degree in Paris and went to the UK. So I would say
So you start your degree in French and you finish it off in English, is that correct?
yes. So I started my degree in the Sorbonne University in Paris, and for a number of reasons which converged, I didn't continue the second part of my degree. I didn't continue in France, and I moved to London. I was in a Middlesex university for my LLB, which is the Bachelor in Law, and then I did my LPC, my legal practice course in the College of Law in London, Bloomsbury. Yes.
And that was through choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, absolutely. Oh, it's a bit, if you want, there's one of the reasons which is a bit difficult to explain, for people who don't know how the French system works. But one of the issues that you have in France is that it's a country that takes secularism very seriously. And one of the side effects, for example, is that if you have a religious affiliation, it can be sometimes difficult. One of them is that when you are Jewish, for example, and you have the laws of the Sabbath and the holidays where you can't take an exam, for example, that is very difficult really to work out in France. So a number of times, some of my major exams happen to be on Jewish holidays, and even some of the seminars which count for the final mark, when for example, if a Thursday would be a bank holiday in France, then it would be pushed to Saturday. That means I couldn't attend it. So a number of times I was penalized, and this is one of the reasons that I decided to move to England, because I realized that a law degree in France can take up to 7 or 8 years, and it would be a struggle every year. So in the UK, I was told that it wasn't an issue, and in fact, it was never an issue when I was there. So that's one of the reasons that I moved to the UK.
So the UK is actually more accommodating for issues like that.
Yes, absolutely. Like just as an example, when we had the first exams that came out in France, because it was more than one of my religious affiliation, we really started fighting the system, and said, let's get another exam or something, and it was really difficult to get through. The answer was, it is a secular country, make your choice. So it was, as you have to choose between your studies and your religion, and it was a complicated equation, which
Wow.
also resonates in many ways in France today. For example, with the question of integration, Islam, etc., is a much more, let's say, acute resonance in France than it is in the UK. For example, these issues specifically. But when I went to England, for example, it happened to me once that they scheduled a bank holiday. They scheduled an exam during a Jewish holiday, and the second I said that to the lecturer, she told me, "Well, either you have your own exam outside of the normal calendar, or we'll change it for everybody." And that's what it. And it was such a different experience in that
Attitude and
sense.
approach.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot to be said about this subject. I wouldn't go into rush conclusion of racism and things like that, but definitely when it comes to the question of integration of minorities and relations to, let's say, religions and other affiliations that are not part of the majority of the population, I would say the UK is more advanced than France. Yes, that I could say
Wow.
that tonight. Yeah.
Joshua, who has been your biggest inspiration and why?
It's interesting. That question is very interesting. And I would actually answer with there's a quote from the Chapters of the Fathers, which is one of the main Jewish ethics writings. It's one of the central books in the Talmud and the Jewish ethic reference and landmarks. It's called the Chapter of the Fathers, and it has many quotes from some of the greatest scholars, all the way back to the time of Moses, and until more or less the second century AD. And one of the quotes says, a wise man is somebody that learns from everyone, because everybody has something to teach. So it would be, I think, to essentialize the question of inspiration to just say one person, although there are some individuals that have very much inspired me. But I would say that really that is the quote I just mentioned of um, learning from everybody really means that you take the value of every individual, from the janitor to the prime minister, all the way to celebrities and intellectuals. Really, everybody has something to teach you, and I really take that into account on my daily basis.
Thank you for that answer. And there we go. We have a big welcome to our dear colleague Joshua Lhote. Henry, many thanks for your wonderful presentation. That's from the Gibraltar Morocco Business Association. Thank you very much. And we have the president, Brahim Krikas, that says, it's my pleasure to extend a cheerful welcome to Mr. Joshua Lhote as colleague at the Gibraltar Morocco Business Association. Your companionship is always an opportunity to learn from. Tell us more about linking Gibraltar and Morocco. What benefits in short and long-term vision? Thank you for your question, Brahim.
Right. So I respond to this now.
Yes?
Okay. So basically, I think Gibraltar finds itself in a conundrum for 300 years. I mean, there's you go back to the Treaty of Utrecht, and the Spanish first um, violation of the provisions of the treaty that was ratified. Spain pretty much denies the legitimacy of Gibraltar as a British overseas territories and its sovereignty. If it doesn't deny it directly, it acts in a way which can be interpreted as a denial of Gibraltar sovereignty. I think it's important, if in the case that Gibraltar cannot function with Spain at any moment in the future, to have a choice. And that's what Morocco is opening, a choice. Meaning nobody says that you have to turn your back on Spain, and nobody says that Spain cannot be, the same business commercial partner that it's been to Gibraltar in many ways, and vice versa. However, why limit yourself to one neighbor when you have two neighbors that are both prosperous, both as potentially, open to negotiation in any sorts of commercial and any sorts of links. And I think Gibraltar will always be Morocco's neighbor, and Morocco is prospering at a huge pace. There's a middle class that's growing. You just have to see the cars that are coming out of Morocco, either in Spain or when you actually travel to Morocco. I mean, the purchasing power of individuals in the country in Morocco is growing by the day, and this is something that Gibraltar can tap in any day. And the sooner the links are created and a normalization of a Gibraltar-Morocco relation is established, the better it will be for both sides, and probably as well for Spain, because competition is a good thing as well. In a nutshell, that's what it is.
What, in your opinion, do you feel is stopping the re-establishment of direct links with Gibraltar at the moment? Because to remind our viewers who may not be aware, pre-March 2020, we had a direct flight run by Royal Air Maroc, and also a ferry link that linked Gibraltar and Tangier every 2 weeks.
Well, I can't really respond precisely on that because I'm not involved directly with the government. Or I would think that one of the main problems is simply the lack of habit. People are not used to go to Morocco, and probably the marketing around those flights and those maritime links were not diffused largely into the population. I mean, one example that I've always spoken about in the Gibraltar Morocco Business Association is that the Tangier, which is literally 15 minutes away by plane from Gibraltar, is an international airport. So meaning that you could potentially go anywhere in Europe from Tangier and taking a flight from Gibraltar. That means that anybody in Gibraltar wants to go either to the UK, to Holland, to France, to I don't know. I don't want to misrepresent exactly all the list of countries, but there's quite a few destinations that you can take.
It's quite extensive, yes.
That has never been marketed. I have never heard that. It's an example. I think what happens is that Gibraltar works as a sovereign country in many ways, but as well sometimes it works a bit like a provincial village, and people don't necessarily think outside of the box because everything is already cushy, comfortable enough. You can go to the UK from Gibraltar, you can go to Spain to the frontier. What is it in Morocco? I don't know. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And I think the lack of communication, the lack of understanding of the general population, as well as potentially even people in the region in Spain that would want to go to Morocco, I don't think it's been diffused enough and talked about enough. That could be one of the reasons.
Absolutely, I agree with you, because I recall, and my wife and I being frequent flyers of the direct route from Gibraltar to Tangier via Royal Maroc, we always said that the flight was never advertised in Gibraltar. I have no idea when it was ever advertised in Morocco, but we used to take a selfie, as we do, in front of the plane and post it on Facebook to create awareness that there was actually a flight between the Tangier and Gibraltar. So marketing, I think, has a lot to do with it. So, we
And
hope
maybe
and pray
just the
that.
comprehension, because I think people, I've been living in Gibraltar now for like about 12 and a half years. I think many people in Gibraltar are in the Mediterranean physically, but sometimes in their mind they're somewhere in Yorkshire. They're living in the UK. They don't realize that you've got Africa, and in meaning it's a continent, and at the head of the continent you have a very important country that is facing us. And I don't think that this is something that is democratized in the minds yet. I think it's some kind of evolution that needs to be pointed out, and maybe even hammered a little bit into the minds.
See, and these platforms that we do, the monthly cultural exchange is one of those that is creating a lot of awareness for a lot of things in Gibraltar and Morocco equally. Joshua, let me ask you your biggest achievement so far.
Well, I would say that what I'm most proud and what really takes most of my time is my family. You know, it's a great thing. I think and many people don't sometimes have the opportunity to set a family with children, and I was blessed enough to have 5 children, which keep me very busy.
Quite a
Uh,
handful, I would say, no?
yes, it is handful, but at the same time, you learn from them sometimes more than they learn from you, paradoxically. And I believe that, I mean, of all the different things that I have enterprised in my life, I feel so far this is the achievement that I'm most happy with and proud.
If you may, what are your children's ages at the moment?
So basically between 14 and 4, and we had children every 2 years, 2.5 years.
Oh,
So
quite an age range.
yes.
Oh, we have Stephen Marine joining us. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us. And he says, good evening, Josh. What is your view on how the geopolitical changes in this area will affect Gibraltar?
Which changes are we talking? Are we talking about
Geopolitical
Brexit?
changes, he
Brexit,
asks.
for example, Brexit is he? He's not talking about this the situation in Russia, obviously. I would say that the Brexit is, in fact, for me, a blessing in disguise for Gibraltar, of all the reasons that I mentioned before. It will catalyze. You know, I mean, historically, again, um, some of the major, and this is a feature of Gibraltar. Gibraltar is, as much as it is, you know, a bit of a little village, it's also at the center of geopolitical major changes, like the Treaty of Utrecht, for example. Article 10 speaks about Gibraltar, but it's really the, if you want, the origin of the European Union, of Christendom in that sense, if you want. The idea of the Treaty of Utrecht was to stop, you know, the 30 Years' War, the Protestants, the Catholics. I mean, the idea was to set, you know, as much cohesion as possible within the European countries who were constantly at war. Brexit is an example, but you would know also, for example, that the Trafalgar Battle, which as a Frenchman, you know, I could really regret what happened, but historically it's a fact that Trafalgar Battle was won thanks to the help of Aaron Cardoso, who, with the help of the Moroccan sultans, have supplied all the different, you know, weaponry and food that the garrison needed here in Gibraltar to attack the French and Napoleon. So one of the major things in history happened through Gibraltar, certainly because of its location as a strategic place in the world. So Brexit is, again, you know, striking here as something that geographically is not directly linked to Gibraltar, but Gibraltar is have a resonance over these events. And I think, again, Spain has historically been usually quite, antagonizing to Gibraltar. So what will happen with a situation like a potential radicalization of the parties like Vox or others in Spain, and Gibraltar could become a scapegoat of their political struggle, then and Brexit is obviously catalyzing these problems. You know, we say Frontex, we hear of all the issues now at the sovereignty, etc. I think that is creating, you know, an even more important urgency into fostering links with Morocco and Gibraltar.
Absolutely. Um, Joshua, what was it like working at Hassan's, and how did moving from Hassan's come about? Two questions there.
Hassan's is interesting. Look, Hassan's for me was really the epitome of hegemony. Like basically, it's an all, you know. I mean, remember at the time when I was at Hassan's, you had the chief minister who was a partner of Hassan's, who was elected in 2011, Fabian, and you also had the head of the GSD at the time was Danny Fitam. So you know, you're talking about, you know, being able to almost have probably the political the political agendas talked about in the boardrooms of Hassan's. I'm exaggerating here, but there was a quite a very strong hold that Hassan had over the affairs of Gibraltar, and many of the minds, of the best minds that were that are here in Gibraltar, especially the legal minds, were in Hassan's. Many other firms have them, but we so it was a very interesting experience. I personally, one of the reasons I left Hassan's was that, let's say that the legal focus in Gibraltar in general, not necessarily Hassan's, which is much more on tax, overseas properties and trust, etc., wasn't a fascinating type of legal work for me. I wasn't. I didn't enjoy it as such. With hindsight now, I would have probably liked court work more than that, because that was pure law. What was doing at Sands, which is obviously part of the goodwill of a jurisdiction like Gibraltar, which is to offer fiscal advantage, to offer trust advantages, had a limit, intellectual limit into my liking, if you want. So that's one of the reasons I left Hassan's.
Do you specialize in a particular kind of law?
Well, I was specifically in that, in trust, in overseas properties, in basically helping clients get the fiscal weight of their tax, corporate tax, and sometimes on a personal level, being taken off of the weight of these burdens. And it's something that Gibraltar does. There's nothing wrong on the legal side of things, but it just wasn't exactly what I thought the law was for me. To practice. If I want to practice law, I would have wanted to do something maybe now with outside court law, maybe much more than that.
Joshua, your most embarrassing moment?
It's hard to say. There's so many. You go in life, and one of the things was very humbling, because I was mentioning earlier, is that when you move countries and you have to learn a language, it's very good if we all have excess of arrogance. We can feel very proud of ourselves, but when you go to one country on another and you have to learn the language, you're basically humbled by the reality around you. And it was an example of one that happened to me. There was someone who had a Scottish accent which for me, as a French person, was impossible to understand. Meaning that I literally, had to listen to somebody and afterwards ask somebody who was present exactly what was said, because I was completely, unable to really respond to that person. And that was very embarrassing, as well as for that person if they realize my situation. That was one of the examples, yeah.
We have Mohammed from Tangier. Welcome, Josh, and thanks to SGA and GMBA. Josh, congratulations. A direct air link between Morocco and Israel. Don't you think Jewish community in Morocco and Gibraltar can use this route instead of other routes in Europe? Thank you, Mohammed, for your question.
Absolutely. One of the works I'm doing with Morocco is linking Gibraltar high-tech companies with Morocco. There's a very, very strong appetite on both sides to foster links. Morocco has been a place where Judaism and Jewish philosophy and poetry and even sometimes on the Jewish law has been set. One of the Maimonides went through Fez, and many of the great names as Jewish scholars went through Morocco, and you have a presence even before the Arab invasions. So there's a very, very strong links between the Jewish community and Morocco. I really hope that it will continue growing. And yes, absolutely. In the same way that I said earlier, that people in Gibraltar could really benefit from a direct link to Morocco, if only to take flights anywhere else in Europe or in the world from Tangier, and definitely from Casablanca. The same thing would definitely be relevant for Israel. if Israel, if the new route, the air route between Israel and Morocco grows, why I would be delighted, instead of having to go to Malaga and take another change to Italy or whatever. If I go to Israel, just fly from here to Casablanca and Casablanca to Israel. That would be
I
fantastic.
mean, I can confirm that the flights have already started to Tel Aviv from Morocco,
Yeah,
Casablanca.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
I think it was 2 weeks ago. I don't think it was the first one.
I spoke to a friend of mine in Israel this morning, and he confirmed that the flight that he actually witnessed the flight yesterday. So I don't not sure how soon before that, but I can actually confirm that there was a flight yesterday that he saw. And I with Priscilla attended an evening on Saturday evening dedicated to Judaism in Tangier, and the Israeli ambassador also confirmed established the flights between Royal Air Maroc, between Morocco and Tel Aviv. So we have El Mehdi Eroy joining us. Thank you. It's good to hear from you guys. I was wondering about the cultural cooperation of both sides.
Um, well, I think this is precisely what we're trying to do right now. No? I mean,
Absolutely.
that's the question. I mean, there's obviously a lot to be done. I think that relates to what we were saying earlier about culture is very much what people do, and what makes people on a daily basis think about things, think about who they are, about their identity. Their culture is very much what makes people who they are. And yes, I think it would be more than relevant for Gibraltar and Morocco, but especially Gibraltar, seeing that Morocco is a big country, and you can't have 40 million people following you overnight. But Gibraltar is relatively small, and we could really, really gain from making Morocco part of the culture in Gibraltar, as a destination, as a place of work, as a place of finding new friends and new horizons. Definitely.
I mean, I can actually say that pre-COVID, we did have an exchange organized by the Ministry of Culture in Gibraltar, where some artists were brought over to Gibraltar, and they hosted an exhibition, and the musicians visited schools, and that is something that I know that the Director of Culture in Gibraltar, Seamus Byrne, is wanting to follow on when links are re-established. So really, what we're speaking here is that we can't get those links fast enough to get everybody moving with what we want to continue to do, which was started when we still had links. Um, your most memorable moments today, Joshua?
Again, I will go back to my family. I've seen the births of my children. Everyone has been, it's very strange to have, when you have a child, you almost like you always knew them when they're born, and it's a very strange situation. It definitely, my first son, when he was born, I was just feel like we always knew each other, although he was just a few seconds old, and it's pretty much the way that most important determining factor in life. So yeah, I would say that. I mean, there's many moments that were excellent moments in my life, but those were the most, I would say, determining ones.
Have your children all been born in Gibraltar, Joshua?
No, my firstborn was in London because I was still studying there, and my wife as well. And all the other four were born in Gibraltar. Yeah.
We had Mohammed Rani. Thank you, Mohammed, for joining us. He says, thank you, Joshua, for this uh,
Amazing. I mean,
amazing live discussion. Can you please share with us your experiences in Morocco? Thank you, Mohammed.
it's funny. The first time I went to Morocco, I felt like I was twice at home, um, because it reminded me of France in so many ways, and as well it reminded me of Israel, because obviously the Middle Eastern type of infrastructure, the colors, the people around, the smells, the spices, this all these things, and also I didn't really know. I knew that my mother's family was originally from French Algeria, but I didn't know exactly my background, and I found later on, after I moved to Morocco, after I went to Morocco for the first time, I found out that my ancestry is from the Atlas, the Tafilalet, in the south of Morocco by the desert, and my family was a Berber Jews, but again they're from almost 2,000 years when in Morocco, and it was almost like a call, it was like, wow, you're back at home kind of thing, and I very much enjoyed. I can say, without any demagoguery or any sorts of flattery, that the people I've met in Gibraltar, in Morocco, sorry, were always extremely welcoming, extremely open-minded, and usually intellectually very challenging, in a sense that they had all the double, triple culture. They spoke French, they spoke Arabic, they spoke Spanish, many of them spoke English, but also they. I was always amazed. I think it's in. I mean, I was always very impressed with the eloquence of Hassan II. There's a lot of lectures that I've seen online about him. I was always fascinated by his point of view. The man was a visionary and a philosopher, as well as a king. It's a country that has a lot of history, a lot of dignity. One of the things Hassan II used to say, which is visible if you look at it on a historical level, Morocco is really one of the only countries that was never completely colonized. Even France didn't have it as a colony; it was a protectorate. But for example, the Ottoman Empire didn't enter, and Spain never really got to get into Morocco. It's a country that has its own dignity, its own culture, and its own life, and you can feel it. I very much appreciate that when I go into Morocco, and I really hope and I see a great future for anything to do with Morocco. I really see the future very bright.
Excellent. And tell me, oh, we have Kevin Salsa joining us. Thank you, Kevin. Would like to thank Joshua for his supporting mentality in joining Gibraltar and Morocco links for the near future. Hope we can start soon to build up all the opportunities that can be developed in all aspects. A big thanks again, and hope it's not too long. It's not long to see the lights down south. Thank you, Kevin, for your contribution.
Mm.
Uh, Let me ask you, when you say you first came to Morocco, but which part of Morocco did you visit first, and how much have you seen of the country?
The first time I went only to Tangier. I went there to, I met different people that eventually became business partners of mine. Very generous, very very nice people. And over the years, I've traveled a little bit. I've been to Casablanca, I've been to Marrakech, to Rabat. I haven't gone back to my roots. I haven't got yet back to the Atlas, but I want to. Or obviously Dakhla. I would like to go and visit the Western Sahara, but I haven't yet. I've been usually to more like urban areas, but slowly, I'm as I say, I see Morocco as a long-term prospect. So I would love to visit as much as possible of Morocco. Yes.
Excellent, and God willing, you will. How do you balance your time between work and your private life? I mean, you've already mentioned you have 5 children, you're married. How much of a hands-on dad are you?
Look, I mean, the fact that I'm self-employed, and interestingly, COVID. I used to share an office before COVID, but having worked from home made things very different, and my focus again was very much around the children's schedule. Wake up in the morning, yeah, you have to dress the kids, then they go, then obviously a certain amount of time they're at school, but as soon as they come back, you have to feed them. My wife is obviously extremely dedicated. She also works, and the fact that I'm self-employed, and she also has a great input into everything to do with preparing everything that the children need is something that is extremely helpful, and for me, I try my best to really, the focus is more around the kids. The rest is it's the purpose is the family, and the rest is serving that purpose. So work, everything that you do around it is to prepare for them, for their future, for their balance, etc. That's how we see it.
So when your kids have an issue, do they call mom or dad?
Look, my
Or both?
daughters tend to call mom. My sons tend to ask. They don't say. They just ask. Where is my dinner? Who who has tempered with my closet? Who has not done this and that? So this is what you hear. That's quite neutral. We're both guilty, my wife and I. But in general, no, they're good kids, and they become more and more helpful as they grow up. Yeah.
Excellent. And we have Nicholas Karnani. Thank you for joining us, Nicholas. Very interesting live program. It goes to show how different cultures can live together. We are very bonded with Morocco and Israelis. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for your contribution.
Thank you.
Um, you have been part of the think tank named Understanding Gibraltar. How did this come about? How did this happen, Joshua?
Very interesting. So as I mentioned, you mentioned it in my earlier presentation about my bio. I came to Gibraltar. So as a kid, obviously, I had no really ideas about cultures and different religions and harmony. I mean, I didn't really know. Although, I knew my Jewish identity was well known from a very young age. But different cultures, harmony between cultures wasn't something that I really thought about. And I really, when I came back here from the age of 15, I came back to Gibraltar in the summers. Comparing my life in France, for example, or the experience I had had in Israel, it was very different in the sense that you had people from private Jewish schools. Usually in France, when we were in private Jewish school, we pretty much ghettoized a little bit from the rest. Of
Protected.
protected, yeah, but I mean we're sheltered from, let's say, any other influence in society. And in Gibraltar, I didn't see it wasn't necessarily a contradiction. You had people who went to Jewish private schools, and they had friends, from the Catholic community, from the Indian community, from less the Muslim community at the time, because I didn't really know many people. But eventually, when I actually moved to Gibraltar, I could really, appreciate all of these potential relations, connections that would happen between individuals here that could really have, on the symbolism of it, have a resonance on the world scale, and that's the idea.
So let me take you back to your infancy. You started your schooling as an infant in Gibraltar, correct?
Yes, my first schooling was in Gibraltar. Yes,
Right, and that was in Baumhouse Lane at the Jewish school?
yeah, in the Hebrew school, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. So how did the kids see you there? Because did they treat you as an outsider, as a foreigner, or did you blend in straight away?
I have absolutely no memory of feeling any sort of difference between any other. I mean, I remember people playing. I would say maybe I don't think I don't think there is such a thing as being an outsider, especially at that age. I mean, I think these concepts come up later on in time. Yeah.
Because by then you spoke fluent English already?
So my memory is very quickly to be in English. I mean, I was in a nursery at the beginning, so it was small, but by the preschool, I remember speaking in English all the time. Yes, and in France later on when I was in school, English was almost a subject I didn't have to study. It was probably in my subconsciously there. It was a language that I had in me, although I wasn't practicing it. I had it in my mind. Yeah.
At home, we have Abdelnour Mezain that says, happy to join the discussion and a lot of thanks for making this exchange possible. I think that understanding Gibraltar can also mean making it a common space of fiction writing because I think that in literature there should be no borders or boundaries. Thank you very much for your contribution.
That's a very good point. I mean, speaking about culture, obviously. or everything to do with literature is directly involved with putting culture on paper, and there's quite a lot of books I've read from Gibraltar and about Gibraltar, but when it comes to novels, maybe there's not so many. I've read one. It's called the Key of the City of Sam Benedy. I don't know if you read it. There's a
Mhm.
very interesting historical perspective. But when it comes to novels, obviously I haven't seen so many yet. So I think it's a very good point. Yeah.
I encourage you to read, if you haven't done so already, Invisible Threads, written by my wife, which
No.
is a novel, and
Okay.
it talks about Spain, Gibraltar, and Morocco.
Fantastic. I will get hold of the book, of course.
Tell me,
So just
Joshua.
to answer your question earlier about
Yes.
understanding Gibraltar, it's difficult to speak in a short, but the idea of the think tank is to be able to take the 300 years of Gibraltar. As you know, the Treaty of Utrecht originally wasn't really about social harmony or cultural harmony. The Treaty of Utrecht provides that Jews and Moors cannot live in Gibraltar.
That's
And this
right.
paradox of having a 300 years old Jewish community so well established and functioning with the rest of the communities, I hear many people saying the Jewish community today is more conservative than it used to be, and people today have a different approach that they used to have. But this is all these things that are very important to discuss. But the fact that a 300 years Jewish community staying in Western Europe, standing as it is already so rare. But knowing that originally the Treaty of Utrecht was actually the opposite project, this is one of the reasons for me that I thought a think tank, which means the human experience behind this paradox, is very important. To actually, somebody has to start. It's a bit like Morocco, Gibraltar. Something has to start once the idea and the concepts are already put into place. Once the bridge has already, everybody can come in. But something has to be started, and I think the example of Gibraltar really could be an example to the world, in a sense that really I really believe that the human nature and everything that exists in history and to this day is simply us discovering our own nature as humans. So the formula that Gibraltar has is something that would need to really be something that we can fathom and export, because it's the human experience that of Gibraltar has allowed racist provision of a treaty to be totally overcome. And by the way, Morocco is at the center of it. It's only because Gibraltar, the governors of Gibraltar, needed the Jewish merchants from Morocco, who were imposed by the sultans at the time, the Mullah Ismail and the different people, that Jews became residents by default. And there was a loophole invented. There's a very interesting lecture from Sir Joshua about that. If you're interested, I'll forward it to you. Um,
Yes,
the,
please.
the governors had to invent a loophole saying that the Jews were retained to pay their debts because they were under pressure from Whitehall as well as Spain at the time to expel the Jews. So it's not something that came about simply or under the table, or it's something that was complicated but yet came about formally, and the result that we have today. And I think that's the think tank is trying to grasp in the human experience of Gibraltar what is the, if you want, the chemistry that allows racism, if you want, to be transcended. There's more to be said, but I try to say it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting and food for thought, as you say. I mean, I recall seeing you as part of a GBC program weekly where you used to talk about all these issues.
Yes.
How did that come about as well?
Again, very simply, we had there was one of the producers of the shows, Wesley Tacken, who was inviting me usually for the program that they had was called Questions of Faith, and I'd come a number of times as a Jewish individual, and I talked to him about what we're doing with understanding Gibraltar. We related to many different thinkers in the world. I also don't want to take all the credit. There was two people who founded it with me. As Ronnie Alessio and Samuel Benamor, and later on, people like Carmel Kalilian and Nikki Calamaro or Jeremy Gomez, as well as Daniel Bulla. A lot of people have contributed to what understanding Gibraltar is. So I'm just one of the people. But my personal vision was what I mentioned earlier, and we have reached out to many people around the world who were fascinated by that fact, by the way. They discovered some of intellectuals that are well known, and one of them, one of the people that we reached out to had written a piece in the Guardian about Gibraltar. It was called Keith Can Harris. He had written when at the time where Brexit came out. Pretty much all the articles in the Guardian, who is more left wing, was about Gibraltar will become Spanish, colonialism is over, etc. That was the tone of the articles you would see. Which, well, whatever, there's merits to everything, but it's not exactly the point that we have here today. However, Keith, the article he had was the left should learn to love Gibraltar. It's a multicultural harmony. And the way he features Gibraltar was exactly how we saw it. So we contacted him and he answered us within minutes. And then he came to Gibraltar, and it was also Colin Pons had made a very interesting short documentary, and one of them is when Keith comes to Gibraltar and express himself, and he's still with us, by the way. We still speak to him, and the idea is to reach as many brains and as possible in the world who are interested in human nature and in the potential of good that humans have, to see Gibraltar as an example to the world. Yeah.
I have to ask you this. When you speak to your children at home, do you speak to them in English, in French, or do you mix
Unfortunately,
languages?
yeah, it's a good question. I started talking in French with my son when I was young, but I realized that in front of his friends, he was embarrassed that I spoke to him in another language. And at home, my wife speaks French, but we never spoke together. So I abandoned and we started talking in English. But now my son is learning French and is becoming fluent. And the others like the idea. And obviously they see my family. So hopefully they will be as fluent. But the language we speak at home is definitely English. Yeah.
English. I mean, I pose this question because when my son took French as a subject in those days, O levels, and this is pre-internet, pre-Google, and all that, I vowed to speak to him French all the time. And every time he needed to learn a new word, he'd have to get the dictionary. But thanks to those efforts on my part and his, he was top of the class for O-level French and A-level French. So, there's a lot to be
Yeah,
said for having a parent that can practice a language that is being learned in school.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, I did not have the discipline at the time of when they were growing up to impose it. But I hope that we can, eventually reach the aim of them learning French, also Hebrew. They speak Spanish as well from around. Gibraltar also allows a lot of new horizons on the cultural level. So that it's also definitely an important feature.
Absolutely. My final question to you, Joshua, is what are your future projects? What's in the pipeline?
Uh, Again, uh, I mean, I personally, on a work basis, I tell you what is most important for me is meeting loyal and competent people. When you work, for example, in the commodities, because the prospects are so high. Let's say, for example, in oil and gas, if you enter, into one transaction of 20 million barrels, you can become very wealthy overnight. But I think it plays on the mind. A lot of people think you can make a lot of money very easily, and they stop to the prospect rather than the effort, and you end up having 99% of dreamers and crazy people and sometimes scammers. And when you meet real serious and competent people, it's such a relief. So this is really, my project is to meet as many good individuals as possible, and create a good place, as well as obviously good willing people when it comes to social harmony in general. So my projects are around that really. I'm very interested in human nature, how we can really control our nature, because we're very much there was I don't know if you're aware, but there was a very important philosopher in Cordoba in the 12th century called Ibn Rushd. Averroes, we call it in Latinized name. And he became a Thomas Aquinas later on, who took a lot of his knowledge. Really wasn't happy with one point of Averroes, which was that Averroes thought that we don't control the thoughts. We can put ourselves within general human thoughts, but thoughts is something that is separate from our mind, which means the individual only kind of, internet tunes it to general thoughts, but it doesn't own these thoughts. Thoughts are beyond us. And Thomas Aquinas, later on with Descartes, for example, thought, I think, therefore I am. Thomas Aquinas really thought that the mind is by the individual. And he really rejected that point of Averroes, although he took a lot of his knowledge, which became the source of the scholastic eventually, and all of the Western philosophy. I really believe that Averroes had a very good point, that human nature, which he called the thoughts, is something that is beyond us. We don't really understand it. So we really want, to get a community of human beings that want to really understand who we are and control ourselves through that. And that is really my project on a professional as well as a personal and a cultural, social level. All of these things are based around human nature.
Well, thank you, Joshua. The hour's gone. As I said, time flies. Thank you for having joined us in our cultural exchange. It has been a pleasure to host you tonight live from the
Thank you.
Casbah here in Tangier, bringing our cultures closer. And guys, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Good night and stay safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, everyone.
Pleasure, Joshua.